All right, can you hear me? Okay. Hey, first I want everybody to stand up. All right. Put your hands up like this. Everybody doing it? All right, now you can sit down. Okay. You've just been sitting for like an hour or so. I'm one of those speakers that you really need to have some blood going before I start because it'll be bad by the time I'm done. Hey, I'm so excited about Scott Long. And man, that guy is just incredible. When Scott started a year ago, he and I sat down and talked, and I said, remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And he had a vision that was the same as Pastor Aaron's and mine and so many others of us at Highview. And I said, think about what Highview could look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And I'm just amazed at what God has done through Scott in 1 year. And later on this weekend, you're going to hear a way that we'll ask you about your discipleship groups. But what's the current number of discipleship groups we have on record? Do you know? 37. So from a year ago, 0. We had a few guys that were doing it, but we've got now 37 active discipleship groups that we know about. And there are others, I'm sure, that we'll learn about even this weekend as we talk more about it. But I'm thankful for Scott in that way. I'm not thankful for Scott for scheduling me tonight between him and Blake, okay? Because as you look at the three of us, one of these does not belong, all right? We got two young, physically fit, incredible communicators, and then there's me. But I'm thankful to be here. I want to talk to you tonight about what is a D group and what is a discipleship group. That's the method that we use here at Highview to make disciples. Scott did an incredible job of talking about the principle of discipleship and what that means. But I just want to talk to you about some specifics, some practical steps. And he's already gone through Matthew 28, so we're not going to go back there again. But the idea is Christ commanded us to make disciples. Let me ask you a question. What is a disciple?
Someone who knows and follows God.
Somebody who knows and follows God. How about is there just a little bit broader definition? A student. Somebody who follows, a follower. It doesn't even have to be God. I could be a disciple of Scott Long's ability to catch football. Probably wouldn't work very well. But I could. I could be a disciple of a lot of things. We're specifically talking about how to make disciples of Christ. And that's an important thing as we talk about some of the practical things about studying together and learning together and spending time together and doing life together. One of the things I want to make sure that we remember is that we're trying to make disciples of Jesus and not disciples of ourselves. Sometimes it's easy to lose that as we think about building our groups and making our groups and spending time together and investing in other people. It's easy to become a disciple of the disciple maker. And we want to be disciples of Jesus. The word disciple is used 260 times in the New Testament. How many times do you think the word Christian is used? Just a very few. I didn't even count them. 1, 2, 3. I don't know. It's not very many. So disciples is what Christ wants us to make. Disciple is an action word. We are disciples. We make disciples. A disciple is a learner, a follower. Those are action things. A Christian is kind of a descriptor, is a kind of a status term. So I want you to think about that distinction as we talk about making disciples and what it means to make disciples. Now, as we talk about how to make disciples, we like to talk about discipleship groups, and that's what's on the screen. That's what I want to talk to you about. We use D group for short. What is a discipleship group? What is a D group? First, let me tell you what it's not. It's not a Sunday school class. Here at Highview, a couple years ago, we changed the terminology we use, and we use the word community groups. How many of you are in a community group? I hope every hand goes up. All right. A couple guys in my community group here. There's a place for community groups. Community groups are super important, but a discipleship group is something different. A discipleship group is a smaller group. We like to think of a discipleship group as 3 to 5 people, the same gender, much like the groups that you're sitting around the tables tonight. That's very intentional. It's a closed group. Who knows what a closed group is? It means once we kind of get it going, we don't invite new people. A community group, on the other hand, is an open group. Okay, if we have a community group. You might have 10 people in your community group. You might have 20 people in your community group. But the idea of a community group is it's an open group. Jake and I met a guy the other night in my neighborhood. He's not a believer. And Jake shared the gospel with him. And we invited him, come to our community group. You know, come on into our community. Bring your girlfriend. Come and join us. A discipleship group is totally different. A discipleship group is a group that you're very intentional about investing in, studying together, reproducing Christ into them, the things that Scott talked about a few minutes ago. But it's a group that's set up for a time, 12 to 18 months. I had an incident a while back. I was working with a discipleship group of guys, and I had 4 guys I was meeting with. Pretty troubled guys that had nothing at all in common with me. And some guys that were struggling with addiction, a guy that had gotten out of prison. 2 of them actually had been in prison and was working with these guys. Excuse me. I had a good brother at church here come up to me and said, man, I know you're working with those guys and you meet with them. I've got another guy that really could use that kind of, a group. And can he come? And I said, no, he can't. I said, now I'll be glad to, you give me his number. I'll be glad to call him and meet with him, talk to him. But that's not what this is for. This is not a support group. This is not a opportunity to just kind of be evangelistic and bring folks into the church. This is a group of guys who have trusted Christ, who are believers, who are on a journey to become disciples and then disciple makers. And that's a key distinction, too. We want to talk about, there's a guy named Robbie Gallaty. You'll probably hear his name again this weekend. He's a Southern Baptist pastor in Tennessee, and he is, I think, responsible for kind of a resurgence of this kind of talk within the Southern Baptist Convention particularly. But nationwide right now, he's a young, energetic pastor, a lot like these 2 guys. But he has written a book, and he's done a lot of conferences, but he's got a definition of what is a disciple, or what is discipleship. And discipleship is intentionally equipping believers with the Word of God through accountable relationships, we've talked about that, empowered by the Holy Spirit in order to reproduce Christ followers. Okay, so that's what we want to talk about this weekend, is that the purpose of discipleship groups is to reproduce. Our goal is to focus on a smaller group so that we can reach the end goal of reaching more. We can get the greatest preacher around and fill the worship center above us, and that holds, somewhere shy of 2,000 people. We could fill that every week. But think about the impact if we took half of that or a tenth of that, and those people were each out in the world meeting with groups of people each week. And then those groups would multiply and meet with others. Think about the difference in impact we could have long term. I like to think about reproducing as the key to why we do discipleship groups. There was a guy that wrote a book many years ago, about 50 years ago. His name's Dr. Robert Coleman. He was a seminary professor, and he's actually still living. He lives here in Kentucky, but he wrote a book called The Master Plan of Evangelism. How many of you have read The Master Plan of Evangelism? Incredible. Little book, simple book. A lot smaller than Robbie Gallaty's book. Start with that one. And he has 8 chapters in there, and I think the first one is identification, maybe? Selection. How to select the guys that you're going to have in your group. And then the last chapter is reproduction. That's what we're going for, is to do the things that Scott talked about in the principles with people for 12 to 18 months, and then do just like Scott's mentor did to him and say, all right, Time for you to go out and get a group and start the process over again and multiply. Scott said something that I wrote down earlier. He said, principles are timeless, methods come and go. So some of you, maybe like me, have gone through a lot of your church life without ever hearing about discipleship groups. But it's not a new idea. In fact, I mentioned Dr. Coleman. He wrote his book, I think in the 1960s, maybe. He talks about this idea. Also, there was a guy about 2,000 years ago that used a method not much different from this. Jesus, that's where we first get the idea, is from Jesus himself. Jesus ministered to a lot of different groups. And if you think about the record we have of Jesus' life and ministry, he ministered to a group we call the crowd. Think of a time when we think of Jesus just ministering to a large crowd of people. Examples? Sermon on the Mount. That's right. We've got another one where it says he fed 5,000 people or 4,000 people. So we have recorded where Jesus did preach to large crowds. But think about that. Jesus was here for 3 years. He had 3 years to minister, and he traveled around. We have very, very few recorded instances where he preached to large crowds like that, don't we? If you think about, if he was here for 3 years, most of us in this room, if we were in that spot, would probably think, all right, how much does it cost to rent Freedom Hall? All right, Cardinal Stadium. How can we get Cardinal Stadium and fill that thing up, because I'm going to go down there and that wasn't Jesus' model. He did that, but it was very rare. He also had a congregation. The book of Acts talks about the 70 or the 72 that kind of followed him around, or at one point 120. I think after the resurrection, it said there were 120 that were kind of left as the church. So he had this group of people that he was ministering to. But Jesus restricted 9/10 of his ministry to 12 guys. 90% of Jesus' ministry was spent living life and walking around from town to town and going to weddings and going to see friends and going to the temple, going to the synagogue with 12 guys. Most of that time he spent with 3 of them, or a large part of it at least. Now, there are some recorded instances where Jesus also did some one-on-one ministry. Can you think of any time when Jesus did one-on-one ministry? The woman at the well. That's right. Nicodemus, when Nicodemus came to him, we have a record of Jesus speaking to Nicodemus one-on-one. This was not his normal thing. Most of his ministry was with this group. So that's where we kind of get the original idea. We also have recorded in modern church history or church history from the past similar kinds of things. There was a guy named John Wesley in the 1700s who used a model much like we do today. He had something called the society, which is what we might think of as the church. And then he had classes. You'd come to the society meeting. That's kind of an open-air evangelism thing. And when you come to that, they would sign you up for a class. And the class would be maybe like our community groups. And then when you go to the class, come to the class once or twice, and they would assign you to what they called a band, which would be a discipleship group. That's a group that would get together and pray and practice the spiritual disciplines, hold each other accountable. So there's a long history of this kind of ministry. Now, there are different ways for people to make disciples. Can disciples be made in large groups? Probably. It'd be tough, I think. Can they be made one-on-one? Definitely. We've got some good examples in life and experience with people that have had one-on-one mentoring. I've known lots of guys who can look and say, man, this guy mentored me one-on-one. We've got people here in our church that are heavily invested in models of discipleship, of one-on-one discipleship, and that can work. We think as a church, though, the best method is discipleship groups, a group of 3 to 5. Why would I think 3 to 5? Anybody got any ideas?
Perspective. Each person brings a different perspective. One-on-one, pretty linear.
That's right.
3 or 5, you learn from each other.
That's right. One-on-one, another challenge with one-on-one is there's always a leader and there's always a learner. So if Miguel, my good friend, and I were in a disciple group, and Miguel said to me, "Hey, Jeff, come and I want to disciple you," he would always be the leader and I will always be the learner. And he'll ask the question and I'll answer it. And that will never change. But if there's 3 or 4 or 5 of us, maybe he'll ask a question and you'll answer it. And then next time Randy will answer it. And next time Randy will ask a question. And it develops much more of a group mentality, so it allows people to experience kind of growing and learning and leading together. Does that make sense? So that by the time we get to a year from now, and Miguel says, "All right, time for you guys to go out and get your own group," it's a little bit easier to make that transition because we've all had some opportunity to lead and to ask questions of others. It's much easier to reproduce when you use a group of people. Okay, so if we have a group of 3 or 4 or 5, when it comes time to reproduce, there's a much better success rate. It's kind of like grass seed. You ever look at the back of grass seed and it talks about the germination rate, right? So you know what I'm talking about? So they know, like there's going to be some that don't work. So if I spend a year or 18 months with Rube and then he doesn't reproduce, then where am I? I just wasted all my time. So he's not even smiling. Look at him. He's not even smiling. He knows I'm messing with him. That's another reason for doing 3 to 5. How about if we did more? What happens if you tried to do more than 3 to 5? What if we went for 10 or 12?
You're in a community group.
It becomes a community group. That's right.
Place to hide.
That's a place to hide.
Some people,
That's right.
get bigger groups, they won't ever talk.
That's exactly right. And Jesus did 12. I'm not nearly as good as Jesus is. So I better start smaller, right? Were you going to say something?
We also had 3.
He did. He had his 3. Yeah. That's exactly right. I feel like I haven't been up here at all, but I'm over time already. I want to tell you that a discipleship group, a D group, is very it's life-changing. Okay, I'm veering off topic a little bit, but I had this in my notes. I want to tell you. I have had the experience over the last few years to be in several different groups, and I've started a couple of different groups with guys. And just like Scott talked about the experience he had with his mentor, I want to tell you personally, seeing the guys that I have worked with, where they were when we started, and where they have come, and seeing them now step out into leadership, I mean, it's like my own kids. It's like seeing my son do something great. And God is using it in an incredible way, not just in what they're doing, but in my life. So I want to encourage you guys as we walk through this journey the next 24 hours. You will not be disappointed. God will be faithful, and God will bless you incredibly as He uses you to lead a D group.